Hello again, I'm Kyle, and tonight I'll be reading through the second chapter of the book of Esther from the Bible. All right, so this first chapter, or this first place in the chapter is titled Esther Becomes Queen. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan, the citadel, into the women's quarters, under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women. And let beauty preparations be given them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." So this first part seems that King Ahasuerus was probably feeling lonely. He's thinking about Vashti. And so his advisors jump in pretty quick to remind him of the plan to get somebody else. So when he heard this thing pleased the king, and he did so. Verse 5. In Shushan, the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. So just something that's interesting here, that King Saul was a son of Kish, a man named Kish, and he was also Benjamite. Verse 6, Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, the king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. So that would make Mordecai Esther, or Hadassah, which is her Hebrew name. They would be cousins. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So he must have been, considerably older than Esther, and she's as his own daughter now. And as far as their relationship. Verse 8. So it was when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan, the citadel, under the custody of Haggai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, into the care of Haggai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. So he readily gave beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. So she really was getting some extra special treatment more than the other women who had been chose. So this is important because she's already got a lot of going in her favor, so to speak. Verse 10, Esther had not revealed her people or her family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. So it's very interesting. It's obviously important later on in the story that she had not revealed her people or her family, like her ethnicity, essentially. But it's interesting to me that Mordecai had that thought or the sense to have her withhold that. I wonder what was kind of in his mind to say that, but he did it, and she being obedient and submissive, complied with that request. And then you can see, like a father, at least in my mind, this is what a father would do when his daughter is, into a new situation. He is pacing that sounds right to me. Pacing to find out what's happening with her. So he's outside, just waiting to hear. So he's very invested in Esther's life. Another thing to point out, because I know we'd said Hadassah is the Hebrew name. We don't see that name listed again in this book. And Esther would be the Persian name given to her. And so I think I've read that it's either kind of derived from Ishtar, which would be the derivative of our common word Easter now. So, or it was like Esther was a Persian word for star. So that might be something, I don't have specific place that I can reference for you, but that could be something you might want to look into as far as the etymology of her name. Might be interesting to look into. Verse 12, each young woman's turn came to go to King Ahasuerus after she had completed 12 months' preparation, according to the regulations for women, for thus were the days of their preparation apportioned, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. To me, that sounds like a long time. The king's already missing Vashti or thinking about her. And now it seems that when they're starting to look for people, now there's another 12 months to go. But I guess that's what worked for them. Verse 13, thus prepared, each young woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters to the king's palace. Verse 14, in the evening she went, and in the morning she returned to the second house for the women, to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch who kept the concubines. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and called her by name. Now, when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to the king Ahasuerus in his royal palace, or into his royal palace, in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. So as far as what she brought in, it doesn't say what she brought in, but it would probably be something that Esther would have used to impress the king. If you thought in terms of you're going to somebody to meet for the first time, what kind of thing would you want to take? Maybe it might be food. Maybe it might be an item, something to use, something to connect with the other person, something that maybe could show your interest, and maybe if it was shared. So she didn't have really a thought on that. So Haggai, probably knowing the king better than Esther, she took his suggestion. It seemed, as we read the story, that was probably a wise thing to do. So and they give a date reference here. So it says, so Esther was taken to the king Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the 10th month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And so in last chapter, I think it said it was in the 3rd year of his reign. So, maybe this is 4 years later, it seems. But double check that, because I don't know if I remember that right. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther. So that's pretty interesting. He liked her so much, so now he's celebrating again, but now it's her feast. And he did this for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of the king. So she was pretty popular. And instead of Easter, she got her own feast called Esther, the Feast of Esther. So, okay. All right, so the next heading here says Mordecai discovers a plot. So verse 19. When the virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. So once again, he's probably checking to make sure Esther's okay. Verse 20. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her. So she's still standing true to that. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. So their relationship is still pretty good intact, and she's very respectful of Mordecai, who is now, kind of fostering Esther, and so they're, she still takes that seriously. So that's very important. They must have had a very close relationship. She really trusts him, it seems, by her actions. Verse 21, in those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So this matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So there's something else to look into here. At the end, it says they were hanged on a gallows. Not that it really matters how they died, but I did read recently that the hanging in Persia was not hanging like we would think on a gallows. It was to be hung on a pole, or in other words, like impaled. So, which is very, very different and very, I would think, more disturbing, more painful than hanging. So I don't, as some of the other facts that I've mentioned here, I don't have specifics to give you to cite for that. However, I did read that, but where I read it did not have a site. So it could be something fun to look into. Once again, I don't know that it really matters to know how these men died, but it does say that they were hanged, and then it was chronicled. So that'll be important later in the book to know that. So, but you'll see as that comes up. So all these details as they come across, it seems almost that each one is relatively important to the story, and as you see them start to weave together, even though we mentioned in chapter 1 God's name is not mentioned, we start to see the providence of God manifesting without any mention of it. So I never really thought about it for a long time reading through Esther that there's no real mention of God. And I think that is because it seems like a book where you get an inkling that things are kind of being orchestrated in the background. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and our next chapter will be chapter 3 of Esther. So I look forward to seeing you then.